The Danish Empire. Throughout the Napoleonic Wars, the Kingdom of Denmark joined Napoleon's side at first. Through this, they were successful in securing Holstein, land from Sweden, and lots of land from Prussia. However, the Kingdom of Denmark agreed to swap sides and was rewarded as a result. In the peace deal, Denmark kept a lot of Prussian coastal territory and all of Holstein, but was forced to give back all land to Sweden. At this point, Denmark focused on their new continental gains and mostly ignored Norway, leading to the country's independence. Pro-German unification movements were spread across the continent, with Denmark and Austria exerting influence over the states below and above them. During the Crimean War, Austria joined on Russia's side and Denmark on Britain's side. This made the conflict deadlier and more European-wide, with an eventual Danish-British-French victory. Denmark ended up gaining the rest of coastal Prussia and significantly expanded south. Over the course of the next few years, all Austria could do was watch as state after state agreed to join Denmark, and if any state ever questioned why Denmark wanted to do this, they were always reminded that the Danish monarchy was German. Eventually, only a few southern states remained between Denmark and near total German unification. However, France was having none of this, leading to the Great German War. Denmark and France ended up winning this war, which led to Denmark gaining the borders seen on the map and setting the stage for this timeline's World War I. After the Great German War, Denmark renamed itself to the Danish Empire and sought to try and keep itself together. Denmark entered an alliance with Russia and Sweden, while France, Austria, and Britain did the same. The war would start later than in our timeline, starting in 1916. The reason for this is that Franz Ferdinand survives the assassination attempt, but then Franz Joseph is assassinated in 1916 by a Danish spy. The Northern powers, which consisted of Denmark, Russia, and Sweden, face off against the Entente, France, Austria, and Britain. Austria does not do a good job at holding itself together, and by 1919 the empire collapses. The Ottomans end up joining on the side of the Entente. Denmark does not invade Belgium. Instead, France invades Belgium, which catches the Danish off guard. However, they are still able to secure the Rhineland. From there, World War I plays out similar to our timeline. The Russian Revolution occurs, America joins the Entente, and as a result, Denmark and Sweden surrender after the Entente successfully crossed the Rhine in November of 1924. The Danish Empire is dissolved, and the Danish belts are placed under international control and demilitarized, as well as the Rhineland. The Empire of Axam. The Axamite kingdom started out as a city-state located in the city of Axam. It had quickly expanded, taking over various rich neighboring cities. The goal of these Axamite conquests were to unite the Agazi peoples and kingdoms under the realm of Axam. Axam expands to the coasts west and east of the Agazi kingdom of Adalus. In 200 AD, Axamite king Gaydart, after being crowned, would begin a campaign in southern Arabia with his son, Baygat. The campaigns would be successful, and Axam would completely conquer the region we know in our timeline as modern-day Yemen. Gaydart's son, Baygat, would then be installed as king of Axamite southern Arabia. The kings succeeding Gaydart would have achieved economic prosperity, turning Axam into a dominant overseas power, and continuing to invade more city-states in Somalia. After these conquests, Axam would become incredibly rich. By 320 AD, the Axam Empire would become the most technologically and militaristically advanced state in the region. The Axam Empire also invades the kingdom of Kush in the 350s AD, and by the 5th century, Axam becomes the third strongest nation in the world. The Axam Empire continues to prosper into the modern day. The Free Republic of Newfoundland. Following an increase in migration from Ireland to Newfoundland, Irish would end up becoming the dominant ethnicity in the land. This causes the United Irish Uprising in Newfoundland to have a much greater effect, leading to a larger, more centralized fight for the Irish independence of Newfoundland, and leading to a civil war in which Newfoundland gains its independence under the largely Irish Newfoundland. In World War I, the British Empire is defeated by the Central Powers. This causes them to turn fascist alongside the French and the Russians, which leads to a much more expansionist Entente Axis. This axis would end up launching a campaign into America, which would end in the fall of Newfoundland and occupation of northeastern Canada and even Washington, D.C. The Entente Axis ends up losing anyways, and Newfoundland is liberated, with the country being compensated with some minor Canadian lands. The Federal Republic of America. America in our timeline forces a somewhat united entity during the Revolutionary War, but this wasn't always the case. Support for the British was high in the middle and the south of the country, and until the British took a more drastic measure, they stayed that way. In this timeline, Britain, while still being extremely hostile to calls for independence or autonomy, is still keen to keep the wealthy land of Virginia. So when calls for independence are made and eventually won, it is by three nations: the Federal Republic of America, New England, and the Confederation of America, with Virginia staying under semi-British control. By 1900, the FRA is the clear dominant country among the three, with a relatively good standard of living, stable democracy, and good relations with its neighbors. Industrialization brings even more good fortune, as people from unstable regions in Europe decide to migrate over, producing both a sizable working population and a strong middle class. Politics is dominated by the ruling Liberal Party, who's in a unity government with the Bull Moose Progressives. They intend to give every man a voice in the new government, are relatively cordial with their neighbors, and support the current slave rebellion in the COA. The minority parties, including but not limited to the Conservatives, the Pennsylvania Dutch Party, and the Socialist Party, are all vying for seats and the presidency in the upcoming 1902 election. The future is bright for the Republic, and good things look to be in store for the near future. The Jewish Republic of East Africa. In 1903, the World Zionist Congress approves the plan to create a Jewish homeland in Uganda and dispatches a series of envoys to scout out potential settlement locations. In 1905, the British government agrees for several areas of the Uganda Protectorate to become Jewish settlements, alongside a mandate offering Jewish migrant citizenship, while British troops were sent to clear out natives first. The first group of 200 Jews arrive in Uganda in 1907, setting up the later capital of Jewish Uganda, which would become a British protectorate. Global connections allow more and more Jews to migrate to Uganda, causing native peoples to be forced out of their homes. A series of land use acts would be passed by the joint British-Jewish government to offer acres of land to citizens for farming. This leads to a boom in agricultural development, while more natives are being driven away. Eventually, around World War I, there is a population of 12,000 Jews. In the post-war era, the protectorates over Uganda and Kenya are dissolved. In the face of anti-Semitism across Europe, all of Uganda and parts of Kenya become part of the reformed Jewish East African Protectorate. In 1926, they become a dominion with a parliament similar to the British. During World War II, the Italians attempt to invade, however fierce resistance and overstretching causes this to fail. During the Cold War, while the British are pressured to decolonize, they expand Jewish East Africa's territory to ensure an alliance with the state, while natives in the region begin buying into the ideals of communism. Jewish East Africa becomes a firm anti-communist ally after the Cold War, and has a stable and strong republic, though facing opposition from other African nations hoping to liberate the oppressed peoples. Romania-Hungary. The union between Romania and Hungary came about during a stalemate in World War I, where Romania withstood the forces of the Central Powers. This was enough inspiration for the Hungarians of Austro-Hungary to revolt from within and join the Romanians in their push. The Balkans were dominated by them, and with help from the Greeks they took out Bulgaria and took almost all of Austria and the South Slavic states. They win the war, and Germany is humiliated, while the Ottomans never get involved. Russia also collapses, and the Union takes advantage, taking land from Poland to the river Dnieper. This union would result in a new Balkan power on a more stable ground than when under German rule, and a much different outcome to World War II, with an additional power added to the mix. The Third Mexican Empire. The Slavic Revolutionary Commonwealth. Everything began with the adoption of Mikhail Tukhachevsky's proposal to begin the process of implementing natural religion in 1920, resulting in the mass destruction of churches and mosques, followed up by the really harsh peasant uprisings, which were put down by the military, led by none other than Tukhachevsky himself. This weakened the positions of the Communist Party, resulting in Lenin being silently assassinated following a period of instability within the nation and the military asserting its control. Without any restraints, the Red Napoleon marched west, crushing Poland and entering revolution-plagued Berlin and Budapest, spreading further into Europe as France and Britain started to collapse under the mounting pressure of social clashes and American descent into isolation, allowing the Red Marshal to march as far as Denmark before stopping. Soon enough, the Red Army started to leave Europe, and with itself it took men, material, and vehicles. For inside the new Soviet state, the rapid embrace of revolutionary paganism began, reviving the old forgotten faiths of the Slavs, mixing it with Tukhachevsky's own understanding of socialism, involving total military control, occasional slavery, extermination of undesirables, and what he called unchaining the fire of barbarism. The map is set in the year 1950, when Tukhachevsky dies, Western Europe is still embroiled in warlordism, Asia stands under Japanese guidance, and the raiding economy, alongside resistance, rises. The enlightened collective of Andean peoples. After General Carlos Prats managed to prevent Pinochet's coup, Allende has started to double down on socialist principles, slowly eliminating democracy and returning to his young nationalist roots. He ties Chile to the Soviet Union, greatly destabilizing the local situation. He also supports Argentina in its war against the UK, as well as a revolution in Brazil. However, his main accomplishment was finishing the attempt of Cybersyn, finally linking all elements of Chilean society under the watchful eye of thousands of computers, before finally uploading his aging mind to the machine on the day of the 9/11 attacks in America. Throughout the 90s, Chile supported the Shining Path Communist Party in Peru, annexing most of the country. Then they do the same with Colombia and Ecuador, uniting the Pacific Latin America and building the new Andean identity, while every generation of computers further strengthens Allende's grip on the country. The Republic of Absolute Reason. After the failed attempt of removing Maximilian Robespierre from power, the Jacobins consolidated their reign, and with the aid of Napoleon, co-opted by the promises of glory, have managed to seize all of continental Europe, installing the revolutionary principles from Lisbon to Moscow by the end of the 1820s. The Greatest War has brought Europe to its ruin, and the ideas of republicanism had to be implemented through absolute brutality, transforming the young state into a sort of theocracy around the cult of the supreme being, reason, and Robespierre himself. The result? The current social order is copied from Plato's book Republic, mixed in with radical socialism, pan-European ultranationalism, totalitarianism, classical republicanism, and state mysticism, with the rule of a new aristocracy of artists, entrepreneurs, generals, and scientists. There are exclusion zones, marked on the map in red. These are the areas with the highest concentration of reaction, the areas of monarchic and church power. Those places are considered almost satanic and devilish and are ruthlessly bombed into extinction, only to forever be closed off from the world. Every citizen of the Republic must visit and kill at least a few men living there as part of a ritual to become a true citizen. The Republic also wages war across most of the globe, believing in its sacred mission of spreading the true liberty, equality, and fraternity, and is obviously internationally isolated. Regardless, its new chairman, Slavoj Zizek, has ascended and now attempts to hold the entity together as sectarianism and economic ruin looms. The United Communist Republic of the Danube. In 1848, the revolutionaries in Europe allied together and won many of their revolutions. In 1850, Germany and Italy were both unified under liberal constitutional monarchies. The Austrian Empire was completely dismembered, and lots of new states achieved independence. The new states in the former Austrian Empire became the playground for the Ottomans, Russia, Germany, and Italy to expand their spheres of influence. In 1907, the Czech-Hungarian War started, triggering a greater war between the four great powers. The war was devastating for the region. In 1911, the peoples in the area took up arms against their governments and foreign soldiers. In 1912, as most of the region was secured, the United Communist Republic of the Danube was declared in Bratislava after the victory against the encircled German forces in the city. In 1914, they signed a peace treaty with Germany, Italy, and Russia. They continued the war with the Ottomans to expand into the Balkans. In 1915, the Treaty of Moscow was signed between Germany, Italy, and the Ottomans, as well as Russia, to crush the Revolutionary Republic and restore the previous state of the area. On January 2, 1916, the coalition forces started an invasion from all directions. In September, after the fall of Vienna, the unstable republic exploded into civil war, and in November, the last rebel groups capitulated to the invasion forces, initiating the peace talks. The Saxon Empire. Following the defeat of the Franks, the Saxons proclaimed an empire and are crowned the successor to the Roman Empire until 1243 AD, when the empire collapses following a treaty of partition. although this partition would be a lot less significant, as in actuality the Saxons conquered much less land as they focused a lot on Magna Germania. However, France would live on as the Kingdom of Francia after the Franks retreat their empire to Paris. This leads to France still existing, however slightly differently than it did in our timeline. After the collapse of Saxony, the majority of the nation's land would be inherited by the Saxon king's son, known as Peter of the Germans.